So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I know Zero Trust, many of you must be familiar. I know this is a sophisticated audience many of you come from the Zero Trust background or cyber background. So many of you are familiar with Zero Trust. There's been a lot of chatter around it, a lot of intrigue, a lot of presentations going around. And I wanted to bring to you the risk perspective. I wanted to just, I know Shterny did a very wonderful introduction of me, but I also wanted to let you know RESRG is actually a corporate innovation firm. We build roadmaps and frameworks for any types of risk management, any types of risk solutions. So I just wanted to bring you our perspective as we've been helping a lot of institutions build out their roadmaps and various types of frameworks in order to get to Zero Trust. So let's begin. And I won't belabor on this a lot, but I do want to set the stage with the big picture because it is important to put everything in context. Cybercrime in 2020 has kind of exploded. Really, the criminals have taken advantage of the disruption globally by the pandemic. And some of the things that I will highlight, it takes 200 days to detect a cyber attack. So the perpetrators could be in your network for 200 days, as we have seen with the SolarWinds attack or the Russian hack, as some of you might be familiar with, that was just uncovered and is still unfolding. That has been actually ongoing since perhaps March or maybe even earlier, and we don't even know how elaborate it is and whether it's still ongoing or have the perpetrators left and where the tentacles go. So it takes a long time to actually detect these very, very stealthy attackers. Ransomware attacks are getting even more complex with the introduction of RAS, which is ransomware as a service. So these are organizations that you can actually hire to conduct ransomware attacks on whomever you would want that to happen. And they're extremely sophisticated. They have a full organizational structure, and they have obviously a lot of stealth and methods that cannot be detected easily. Supply chain attacks, which is again, the SolarWinds attack is really a supply chain attack, the Russian hack, as you might know. So basically SolarWinds had a software called Orion, which went through a patch update, and all of Orion's, or many of Orion's customers actually updated the software. However, the perpetrators actually were able to penetrate that vulnerability and get not only into the SolarWinds network, but into the networks of anyone who was using Orion and actually went through that patch update. Now, there's a lot more that we don't know since this is all unfolding. So that's something to keep in mind. But supply chain attacks are really also gaining a lot of momentum. This is just one that has that is so high profile that is being reported, and but there are definitely other smaller ones or maybe even bigger ones that have not been detected or publicized. Nation states are getting extremely aggressive, and again, pointing out to SolarWinds, and then organized crime gangs are accounting for 55% of attacks. And most importantly, there's a talent shortage. There are about 1 million open cybersecurity roles, and there are few people to fill them. And finally, 77% of insider threats are related to employees sharing information. And we're going to talk more about insider threats going forward. So what do attackers want? And again, this is very fundamental, but data is the heart of this presentation. I wanted to kind of say that there's nation states are really interested in the geopolitical intelligence. Then there's like out of China, you have a lot of intellectual property and trade secrets. And otherwise, the organized crime gangs are more into financial data and customer data. However, numbers don't lie. Cybersecurity spending is going to exceed $1 trillion in 2021. If you can wrap your head around that number, it's a huge number. However, the damage related to cybercrime is projected to hit $6 trillion annually by 2021. That's an even bigger number, but while I don't want to trivialize this big number, I do want you to remember that this number can almost be meaningless because only 1% of cybercrime is reported, mostly because it's not detected, or by the time it's detected and reported, it's way too late. So cybersecurity has remained elusive despite the money being spent on it. So what's wrong with the picture? The traditional approach has fallen short. And what is the traditional approach? It is perimeter-based. And as all of you, most of you know, the original network, which was basically invented maybe, several decades ago, was where we only used computers in the office. You went into your office 9 to 5, you used the computer there, you logged in there, you left everything there. You did not have access to files on the network and your computer back at home. So everything was done on premise with enterprise applications. There was a very controllable attack surface because the perimeter was defined. Everything was within that perimeter. It was very static because there weren't too many updates, patch updates. There wasn't, things like software as a service and things like that. So there wasn't too much going on. And it was fairly reactive. So if there was ever a threat, it took a while to detect it and also then to manage it. And it was, and in general, as you can see, this is really a very closed network. The modern network, however, has completely been changed with the introduction of so many new and emerging technologies. There is a lot of device complexity because we have not just third-party devices, we have what you call bring your own device. You have Internet of Things. You have also apps and APIs on which data can be stored up in the cloud. There is software as a service. There is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. You have partners that you work with, and they are constantly, transferring data back and forth. So there's a lot going on, and this is not where this ends. As you can see, the partner may have other connections, would definitely have other connections. So this perimeter keeps expanding, and it's really undefined. And because of that, the attack surface is expanding. It's really open and porous, and it's very dynamic. You've got constant updates going on in your software. There are patches, and there are new devices going on, and there are new endpoints that need to be secured. So basically, perimeter security, the basic principle there is anyone outside the perimeter is untrusted, but anyone internally is trusted. However, as I showed to you earlier on, 77% of internal threats arise because some employee has mistakenly shared information or downloaded something from the web that has corrupted the network. Basically, that is the failure of perimeter security. Inside access is not always benign. Modern attacks are from the inside out. like downloading something from the web, for instance. Trusted system brings attackers in, and internal access is loosely regulated. So if someone were to ever enter your network, they're able to very easily move around that network once they're in through an employee's inbox. They can get into Microsoft Teams, they can get access to some other drive, and so on and so forth. So moving within a network is also pretty easy. So basically, the perimeter is the wrong parameter, and we need to move on from that thinking. So it's time to look at cybersecurity through a fresh lens. And that is where zero trust comes in. Never trust, always verify. That is the moniker given by Forrester Research. And just to give you a little bit of background, in 2009, Forrester Research introduced the zero trust concept. And nothing really happened between then and I'd say 2019 is when it started to gain some momentum. But really, except for 2013, where Google developed its own Beyond Corp framework, which is really the poster child of something that's based off of the guiding principles of zero trust. However, because of the pandemic in 2020, we've seen more and more interest in what zero trust can do for enterprise security. And in August of 2020, we also saw NIST release its standards for zero trust architecture. And the federal government, including the Department of Defense, uses zero trust as a key piece of its long-term security strategy. So it is a formidable framework. What is zero trust? Zero trust is strategically focused on addressing lateral threat movement within the network by leveraging microsegmentation and granular enforcement based on user context, data access controls, location, app, and device posture. Now, I know this is a lot, so let's just break this down. This is basically what, Forrester's definition for it. So a zero trust architecture abolishes the idea of a trusted network inside a defined corporate perimeter. It mandates that enterprises create microperimeters of control around their sensitive data assets, really to enable business. And basically, this is a framework and set of principles for architecting security in a modernized way for a modernized network. So there is really the way security is enabled in an enterprise is what zero trust actually encourages. So there's really no notion of automatic trust. Nothing is trusted. No device, no URL, no network. Everything needs to be evaluated and monitored, not only at initiation, but throughout the session. Okay. So these are the 5 laws of zero trust, and some of it is kind of repetitive. But the things that I do want you to take away that are really, there are internal and external threats at all times, and we've got to be aware of that and assume that the network is always hostile. And there need to be policies that are dynamic, so data policies, browser policies, any type of authentication policies have to be constantly evaluated. They need to be dynamic and have to be calculated from as many sources as possible. So the basic tenet of zero trust is ubiquitous least privilege. Grant access to anyone who needs access, but make it very, very specific. So for me, working as a risk analyst in the credit department, working on the auto loan portfolio, for instance, I should only have access to the portfolio that the data for the portfolio that I am responsible for, not the entire drive. And actually, I've worked at large banks where you have pretty much open access to the entire credit drive within your region. So that's very important to know. So the network has evolved from this traditional network. We've gone to what we are seeing, the current state. This would be the zero trust network, where the individual would be at the heart of the network. So the zero trust network is contextual, so roles-based, location-based, identity-based. It is user-centric, so the user is really at the heart of it. There are micro-perimeters that are defined and micro-segmentation done. The attack surface obviously is reduced because you are only because the network is really only associated with an individual, and they and the drives and the devices that they have access to, and it is very predictive. So if this individual's network is penetrated, you can easily predict where the openings are and how this can travel to the larger network, if at all, and you can immediately, quickly arrest that compromise. So it's also very dynamic, obviously, because dynamic not in the sense dynamic, obviously, in the sense that you've got updates happening and there's other software that you're using, but dynamic also in the sense that there are policies that need to be constantly updated or constantly be reviewed. The user access needs to be constantly evaluated, monitored, reviewed on almost a constant basis. The data has to be reviewed, not just data at rest and data in transit, but where data is being stored and where data is being computed. So there are a lot of dynamic elements within the zero trust framework, but it is very user centric, and that is what makes it highly secure. So why is this framework gaining so much interest at this time? Well, as we mentioned, there's been a lot of emerging technologies that have now all of a sudden proliferated our enterprises. So the cloud, even though cloud adoption was slow, adoption for a lot of APIs and software that reside on the cloud was much faster. So there are a lot of collaboration tools, especially now in the pandemic. People are working on Slack and Monday.com and things like that. There's platformification of our businesses. There's obviously device complexity that I mentioned earlier. There's bring your own device, there's third-party device, there's managed versus unmanaged device, there's Internet of Things. There are evolving regulations that require data be protected, for instance, CCPA and GDPR, and workforce dynamics. So you've got remote workforce, you've got consultants, you've got contractors, hoteling, you've got insider threats. There's third parties, there's partners, vendors, so many others. And then, of course, there's transformation going on, especially in the large incumbent organizations, regardless of which industry you talk about. So there's business transformation, there's operational transformation, a lot of digital transformation going on. And obviously, the global pandemic has accelerated adoption, not just of these emerging technologies, but also that of zero trust. So what are the benefits of zero trust? One of the things that we've heard is that there's increased productivity because there aren't, if done right, and once, we'll discuss this later, but zero trust is more of a journey. So at some point in the maturity of your journey, there will be fewer and fewer, and at some point, no passwords. That actually helps the productivity level. You're not constantly logging in and out and being timed out and so on and so forth. So that's one area. And then access to whatever an employee needs is right at hand. They don't need to constantly ask for permission. While permissioning is happening in the background, they're not waiting to be permissioned. Security is ubiquitous. There's obviously reduced complexity just because you've kind of isolated everything to the user level. Everything is very contextualized, and the threat surface has been reduced. It obviously enables the business. It's application user-centric. It's very predictive, as I mentioned earlier. And, while you can say that there's not been much of a study done on return on investment right now, because we're still at very early stages, it is expected that, there will be exponential returns on investment because organizations are constantly updating their structures, their cybersecurity postures, as well as constantly paying out fines or because of various data breaches or doing other things to protect themselves. So there is going to be a lot, of course, also on the reputational risk perspective. It's a huge win. But what zero trust is not, and I've seen that there's a lot of confusion. People think that, oh, we will, get the best piece of software and plug it in and we are done. And that really, it is not the case. This is, as I mentioned, not just about software, but there's policies involved. There's actually a lot of segmentation that needs to be done. And there's also a behavioral element because we are involving people. We also need to ensure that business enablement is done. And for that, there is the least amount of friction. This is, not an IT only project. And again, we're going to discuss a little bit more about that. And it's not a one-off project. It's very infrastructure centric. And it's not infrastructure centric. So beyond Corp, I'll just quickly go through this. They've successfully been able to do this, and their goal was to have every Google employee work successfully from untrusted networks without the use of a VPN, and they've been able to do that. And quickly, I'll go through the Zero Trust roadmap. Zero Trust is an iterative journey. What you need to do to make it successful is really aim for cyber resilience. We cannot be 100% cyber secure. We need to sort of admit that to ourselves. But the thing is, how do we develop cyber resilience is by developing a strategy that aligns to business and risk. So this is really a long-term initiative. It's complex, it's cross-functional. There's a lot of change management going on. But what you need to do is focus on agility, focused on culture and business outcomes. And the way to actually accelerate this is and gain approval from like sponsors in your organization is to maybe piggyback on some of the existing transformation projects. If there is a cloud project going on within your organization, maybe try to like piggyback on that. Or if there's some larger digital transformation going on internally, perhaps that's another way to actually get the Zero Trust initiative going. So this is a framework, and we don't have time, but I will just kind of touch on this. There are just 5 basic tenets: the data, devices, people, networks, and workloads. And data really is at the heart of it. It is the most important part of it. As I mentioned, we really have to protect the data. We have to ensure that data is secure, whether it's in transit, at rest, or how it's being stored, how it's being consumed, how it's being computed. And then there's got to be some governance structures around it, depending on what you're using as computation platforms. You've got to also make sure that that's secure too, and you've got to have dynamic policies, standard operating procedures, and ensure that any regulations that need to be met are done so. And then the challenges that I would say really are, in large organizations specifically, people don't know who owns it. Should it be the CIO, the CTO, the CISO, the CRO? How is that going to be structured? So there are different ways of doing that, and we actually work with a few organizations and have kind of rationalized different types of structures. There's got to be, because it's a cross-functional event, there's stakeholder management that needs to be done. There's tons of stakeholders. And then there's legacy technology that needs to be contended with. And that's, we saw pre-pandemic a lot of resistance to change because of legacy technology, but now we had to change. There's culture, obviously. A lot of it, most of it is really driven by the people, by our employees. So ensuring that. And return on investment, obviously, this is the flip side of what I mentioned earlier. We don't know what the return of investment would be. We don't know how many attacks we would in the future have stopped, and how that return of investment can be calculated. So that is, again, if you wanted to convince a senior sponsor in the organization, could be a challenge. There are not enough zero trust pioneers. Google Beyond Corp is, but I have to caveat that with the fact that Google did a complete rip and replace of their infrastructure. They were at the time a much younger company than many of the incumbents that we see. So they did make a significant investment, but they were able to, it's almost, I would say 7 or 8 years that they're going, they've implemented it and seem to be functioning well with it. And there's obviously no end state. It's a journey, because things continue to change. There are new technologies emerging, business models change, etc. So you need to be strategic and tactical at the same time. So the other thing I want to say is get the basics right first. Make sure that you've done all your asset and device management and various other, user inventorying all your assets, networks, device, drives, etc. Those need to be done before you even embark on your journey for zero trust. But the other thing you need to do is strengthen your expertise in emerging risks, because these are what need to be managed within zero trust, amongst the identity and other piece of it. So ensuring that you have frameworks for this and specific expertise that addresses these types of risks. So that's actually the end of my presentation. I may have gone over by 5 minutes, but I did want to make sure that I give you a quick rundown. This is, of course, a very broad topic, and we could maybe have like a week-long seminar and still not get everywhere. But I did want to make sure that you get all the information or enough information to maybe alleviate some of the confusion. If you need to understand more, if you need to learn more about the frameworks and the roadmaps that we create, feel free to reach out to me. You could connect with me on LinkedIn, follow our company page on LinkedIn as well, and you can sign up on our website for any updates. And then certainly you can reach me via email as well. So with this, I'm going to stop sharing, and I will hand it over to David.